Now, Alex, I always think that there is another option. The government could just let the banking system sort things out on its own. If banks made bad bets, then they go out of business. It's not our problem.
Well, the Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke dismissed this option when he told Congress in a private briefing that it actually is our problem. He was quoted as saying, "If we let the banking system fail, no one will talk about the Great Depression anymore because this will be so much worse."
Yikes. More Alex Blumberg and Adam Davidson from This American Life this weekend at NPR's Planet Money. Right. And our lines are full, and people want to ask you a lot of follow-up questions about this piece and the ideas there. But let's pick up right on that scary thought from Ben Bernanke, and I think, Adam, that's pretty much how you led into the clip, because there's an underlying question here that he touches on, but that I want to know more about, and that is, what is the downside of bankrupting the shareholders, nationalizing, as Simon Johnson wants, to fix the bank's balance sheet, but sending. Well, okay, there are two things here. I don't want to confuse people in a segment where we're trying to clarify. There are really two things. One is, why not just let the banks fail in the marketplace? Why would that trash the world economy? Wouldn't then the FDIC take care of the insured shareholders, and then some other new banks would spring up and start all over again?
I mean,
Alex.
The problem is that most of the people, like if you think of depositors in a bank, like most of us, like a savings account, like we have, most of us probably have less than $250,000 in our savings account, and we are loaning that money to the bank. When we have a savings account, we're loaning that money to the bank. That is protected money. So if the bank were to go under, the government would make us whole.
Pay us, right.
But there's a lot of people who loan the bank money in much greater sums, like millions and billions of dollars at a time.
Pension funds and institutional investors and really rich people.
And really rich people. And there's and that is the main way these big banks sort of function, is getting this huge institutional money, which if the bank were to just fail and those people were not made whole, that would just set off this entire chain reaction of sort of events, because that is, that would mean that your pension fund loses. Your pension fund is lending probably banks a lot of money right now, millions or billions of dollars, and if the bank were to go bankrupt and then they would not be able to pay it back, then your pension fund takes a hit, and that has these consequences on down the road. It's just sort of this horrible spiral.
Which is very different from shareholders, people who have placed a bet. I'm going to buy a share of Citibank. I'm going to be one of the many owners of Citibank, and I am taking on the risk that implies.
So that's the other question that I started to ask. Other than for those investors who took their private sector uninsured risks, bets on the marketplace, on Citibank and these other banks as companies, why not nationalize the banks?
I think it becomes practical and political. I think it leaves the world of that I always feel most comfortable in, sort of economics. I like a world where it's frictionless and it's in a vacuum and it's just how it should be. And then when you get into the messy world of politics, I mean, Chuck Schumer is one of the most powerful people in Congress. He has, close ties to the banking industry. So does Barney Frank. So does Chris Dodd. There's also very real pragmatic issues. I mean, Alex knows a lot more about the FDIC process than I do, but the estimates we've heard is we're talking about basically empowering thousands and thousands of people who don't work for the government to come and work for the government to oversee these large banks. So I don't think that there's an inherent economic argument against letting the banks collapse. I don't know that there's an inherent economic argument against nationalizing them.
Can I speak to the logistics a little bit? Just because the government does take over a bank or two every once in a while, and they're taking over more now, and they're small community banks, little banks with millions of dollars in assets as opposed to trillions that are on Citibank. And even that is a huge job. I mean, you basically the way the government takes over a bank is sort of fascinating. They have to it's sort of like a SWAT team procedure. They have to go in on Friday night and they have to they have to check in under assumed names
at sleazy hotels.
Yeah, at sleazy hotels so that nobody knows. They have to line up a buyer for the bank that they're taking over, and that buyer has to be on strict confidentiality, has to be on hold, and then they just sort of move all at once on Friday night, and then they work all weekend taking over a bank. And this is a tiny community bank in some sort of small town somewhere. And so just all that manpower has to be motivated just to take over one tiny community bank somewhere just imagine Citibank is, hundreds of times as large as that.
And people who know this stuff much better than Alex and I do, some tell us there's no way it could happen, and others tell us, no, it's not that hard. They could do it. So we don't.
Yeah, it's hard
know.
to say. The one thing that you can definitely say, though, is it's utterly unprecedented for this country, and a huge step, and very scary. And I have great sympathy for any policymaker who is contemplating nationalizing our largest banks. I mean, that is just a huge step.